Uber is a once in a generational company. It's a very small team which is running a massive business.
Those years were stressful in Uber. There was a lot going on, lot of transitions, eventually sale of food business to Zomato and so on, leadership transition and whatnot. What is the most impactful thing you do as a CEO?
Every day you have to show up and assume you're the owner of the business. I'm still a work in progress operator, and every day I make my mistakes. Every day I get things wrong. When script goes off, you learn a lot more about just yourself. I wish I had more compartmentalization in my life than I do right now. You can't choose to just operate at a surface level. You have to operate at the ground level, get your hands dirty. Burnout is not a function of the work intensity. It's a function of whether we are giving enough time to switch off from that intensity. You need to be able to give enough time for you to refresh and reset. I am as human and as vulnerable as any of us is.
Prabh, welcome to SparX. I think this has taken more than a year of planning. While we're used to our Uber coming within minutes, getting the Uber India CEO probably takes a year or longer. But
I wanted to make sure if I accept that trip, I don't cancel.
Yeah, that's right. I think what are the cancellation fee in this case, Prabh?
Thank you for having me.
But it's great. We're just talking. Just before we started, and I think I didn't realize this about you. That while everyone knows you as somebody who's really built Uber into such a dominant leadership position in India, and we'll talk a lot about that. But you were sharing that you have interest in theater, and particularly you were involved in a street performance in Delhi. I can't even begin to imagine how. When was this? What kind of theater? What got you into that?
Wow, you're taking me down some of my fondest memories and probably some of my joyous moments. So I'm a big theater fan, both watching theater right from college days, performing in theater. Performance part has now declined a lot, but literally until the pandemic, I used to, on a weekend, every weekend, try and make sure I attend a theater workshop. We're part of a small group which would on Saturdays, Sundays practice in the morning and then pick up some socially relevant themes and go and perform. We'll find a public place in Delhi and just show up and perform, get everyone's attention. Think of a flash mob coming together.
Okay, so all like no advertisement or no.
No. This wasn't like no. I don't think my talent yet breached that threshold. But it was just fun. It was just fun. Nobody even knew what I did professionally. For theater is a great leveler. At that point of time, it really comes down to how you want to show up or the character you are in. Now I just watch a lot.
No, let's take a real example of one of the performance. Which year, what performance, which location?
You won't Google it and find these. So these will be basically early, between 2017 and 19. I used to do that more extensively in central Delhi. You'd see us, for example, perform on themes which were socially relevant. We'll one day pick up theme around child education and show up in a local basti and perform. Or there's a theme which I recall, which was particularly close to my heart, was about pollution in Delhi and how the kids are growing up in a very different environment. And the characters I have played have ranged from being a statue in the play without doing anything to actually
I can do that
singing and dancing.
Yeah. If you ever plan with a statue, then that's
with a successful set of startups, AI company, the podcasts. I think you have a lot more.
I don't know if you're implying that startups require a lot of theatrics, but okay.
They take
part of that
is
true. But ये दिल्ली में बस्ती में कर रहे थे आप, तो मतलब हिंदी में करते होंगे काफी सारी?
वो सारा नाटक हिंदी में था. वो
लिखता कौन था?
कई तो हम खुद लिखते थे. सैटरडे को, शनिवार को सुबह इकट्ठे हुए, 2-3 घंटे बैठ के उसी वक्त लाइन बनाई, सिचुएशन अग्री किया और कई तो इम्प्रोवाइज कर लिया उस टाइम पे. आई थिंक हिंदी में ना एक अलग ही जादू है, ट्रूली. इमोशंस लाने का, मैसेज को करने का. द बिगेस्ट प्रॉब्लम, अभी मैं अपने बच्चों के साथ वही डिबेट करता हूँ. मैं चाहता हूँ मेरी दोनों बेटियां हिंदी बोलें यहाँ पे, लेकिन उनका प्रेफरेंस इंग्लिश ज़्यादा बोलने का. वो इंग्लिश सीख रही हैं, ऑब्वियसली कन्नड़ा सीख रही हैं, लेकिन मैं जब भी कोशिश करता हूँ उनसे हिंदी में बात करने का, तो not as successful as I would to be.
No, I think I totally agree with this कि हिंदी में कुछ you're saying जादू, right? मेरे को ऑफिस में क्या होता है कि I mostly speak in English. बट कुछ एकदम इमोशन के साथ एक्सप्रेस करना होता है तो एकदम फिर वो 2-3 लाइन हिंदी में आती है
Exactly.
उसके बाद वापस गोइंग बैक टू इंग्लिश. सो व्हेन माय टीम आल्सो नो बाय नाउ कि अगर ये हिंदी बोल रहा है तो मतलब इट्स रियली इम्पोर्टेंट. अभी वी हैव टू पे अटेंशन.
Totally. In fact, जब भी like when we do driver FGDs a lot, like we're trying to listen to the drivers, we try and make sure it's always we're doing in the local language so that the emotions are coming out. You're actually feeling the behind the words what are they actually trying to say. So many times you have like global tech teams, people who are not from India visiting, and it's hard for them to, they understand the logic of what they're saying, but how do you get the emotions out? I think that's the magic which, and my team does a fabulous job in translating that.
See, one of the things that the reason I also asked you start here this performing on the streets, it's also takes you away so far away from day-to-day work context. And if I recall, those years were stressful in Uber. There was a lot going on, lot of transitions, eventually sale of food business to Zomato and so on, leadership transition and whatnot. And if I can relate to that, around same, I've always had one hobby which I do with full sincerity and commitment, and because that takes me out, I forget about whatever entrepreneurship pressure.
What was that for you?
In those years, it was golf. I was
wow.
2017 to 19 obsessively. I've played golf. I love golf, very passionately. Abhi nahi ho pa raha hai. So I've had many long pauses in between, but those years were that,
Wow.
I would just once or twice go and practice pretty religiously.
Would you be willing to share your what's the handicap? Is that what?
Best handicap I ever achieved is around 9-10, which is, I think, very decent. In my early 20s, when I picked up golf and had an ambition of eventually becoming a scratch golfer, which is 0. अभी तो हुआ नहीं है, अभी पता नहीं कब होगा, but I also not given up on that. So,
wow.
But coming back to this, this I think the reason I'm highlighting is, I mean, you obviously have a very, high responsibility job. Like, just talk to me about, the benefit you have seen of, I don't know what is their hobby, maybe it's tennis, with your daughters now. What is the, what does it do to you, like as a individual, as a professional, to have something which is completely disconnected from your daily job?
I think firstly, to set the record straight, I wish I had more compartmentalization in my life than I do right now. But when I'm able to do that, I think what it really helps.
Bangalore में street theater चालू करते हैं, मैं स्टैचू का काम करूँगा.
We could start from here. I think what I find really helpful is it allows me to actually get a lot of perspectives which otherwise I won't. We just get pulled out of the day-to-day, the similarity. Theater in my case changes the context, it changes, puts me in an uncomfortable position. I'm no longer the head of the business where decisions are being made. I'm a statue and I need to innovate when script goes off. You learn a lot more about just yourself. I think that's what I have discovered through whether it's tennis or theater or just kind of finding my sweet spot in reading. What I also, I think, do believe fundamentally is that genuinely a journey like this, which many of us are, and I think folks like you are probably covering multiple generational journeys in one lifetime, you need to be able to give enough time for you to refresh and reset.
Yeah.
Burnout is not a function of, hey, the work intensity. It's a function of whether we are giving enough time to switch off from that intensity.
Right. No, I just want to, underline that very strongly, for a lot of professionals, etc., who watch this, to create that one thing, whether you give few hours a week, half a day or morning, like something where you forget who you are, whether you are CEO of the company or an entry-level person. Because when you go and let's say play a game or a theater, you are all equal, irrespective of, age, and, that just does something different to, to recharge and come back with more energy. And you also learn a lot. I think, I mean, people learn so much in playing sports. I'm pretty sure theater also, I think there's some skills you develop along the way, which come in handy for you as a leader, like you are able to do poker face when you need to in the room, or you have to express emotion when you have to, really get people's attention.
I think the biggest value is actually listening, because you're in theater, if you're a performer, you are perennially preparing for the world when another character will go off script and you need to innovate. You don't have a second chance. So I think that really helps. But now this is actually a reminder I need to get back into theater in a far more major way. That's probably my action item from today already.
No, excellent. Yeah, I think I have since you mentioned listening, and I've known you now for almost 10 years in different contexts, and you come across as a leader, very calm and thoughtful. Is that or at least that's the persona I have seen. I have not been in the meetings with you. What is your persona inside the office? You as a CEO, what are the different sides of you people are able to see?
Wow, that's I wonder if my teams have a similar assessment. I think I am as human and as vulnerable as any of us is. I don't think there is one specific persona. I think, but typically I would, if I were to describe myself, I think my colleagues would have seen about 2 to 3 different archetypes. I think one is this, they would describe this passionate operator who loves to get hands dirty, who is willing to get in the details, ask a lot of input level questions, sometimes unreasonably so, but that kind of comes from having the privilege to build this business grounds up. I think I was privileged to be in a company which is so transformational in a geography like India, which is incredibly complex, and building a business which is fundamentally a bits and atoms business. You can't choose to just operate at a surface. You have to operate at the ground level, get your hands dirty. Each trip is different. So when I say if you do 1 billion trips a year, that's 2 billion unique combinations of human interactions happening. Many of them are magical, but some of them actually can go wrong. Then how do you deal with this? How do you create a process for it which works out? So I think that is probably where my core passion for as an operator comes. I think the second is truly about my teams would describe me as a second and a third order thinker. My better half would also describe me as that, and that has both its joys and challenges, you would imagine. I like to think that if we do something, whenever we take a decision, take the time, especially if it's a one-way door call, to think through multiple angles which could play out from there on. Because again, we are in as much in a technology business as in the human business, and the impact of those choices on individuals. Hey, we change a specific logic in which we are trying to solve for driver earnings. Now, that will impact a certain drivers in a certain way. How will that impact their behavior? How will they impact their sentiment? What will they do for the choices they will make downstream? That's still a more linear one, but now start overlaying elements around competition, regulation, consumer sentiment, and the uncertainty gets super interesting. So I think that's where I get my joy out of. And third is really around, I do obsess about metrics, which I think almost to a fault, which gives me a little bit of a sense of, if you're not measuring something, you're truly not able to then move the needle. I think, but I'm also increasingly, as I grow as a leader, I'm beginning to trust my instinct beyond data a lot more.
No, that's excellent. I think some very powerful thoughts in there. Passionate operator. I love that phrase, and I think, I would, I hope then we see a lot more of that all around us. Today morning when I was talking to a small group at CureFit, and somewhere, I ended up, telling that, that your team should know what you are truly passionate about, not the act, you are putting on or the goal you are trying to do. What do you personally as a human being care about, right? And this, so this whole idea of, passionate operator, it rubs off on other people. People can see and feel that passion. I think the same thing about this second and third order thinking, right? Again, it doesn't come naturally to most of us. It's like something I feel one has to cultivate, because it's very easy to just see what's in front of you. If I do this, that will happen. But what is the second order consequence and the third order consequence? It's a very critical, I think, leadership strategy skill. Maybe, your McKinsey background also prepared you for that. But, a lot of time when I'm demanding from you, people were working around me, okay, but what then? What then? Don't tell me like anyone can see the clock and tell the time, but it's going to rain, it's going to thunder, I should feel good about it, bad. Like what is the consequence?
No, I think I've heard you apply this very, very systematically at different stages of the businesses you have built. I think some of the sessions I have had the privilege to sit through when you have coached and mentored emerging entrepreneurs, how you are able to link back the discipline which they should need to bring with the purpose they have. I think goes to that. But I think from my vantage point, I do want to call out. I think I'm still a work in progress operator, and every day I make my mistakes. Every day I get things wrong, and I'm also, I think, truly, I'm just a face for what happens to be an incredibly high talent density organization, which is very mission driven. And I say that not just for the India business, which I have had the privilege to be a part of, but globally, where folks truly believe that Uber is a once in a generational company, where by building a scalable, sustainable business, you're actually impacting the world around you. You're enabling livelihood. You're helping people get from point A to point B, which unlocks economic opportunity, particularly for segments which might be marginalized. And that just drives, and you combine that with talent density, combine that with technology. So it's a very small team which is running a massive business at this scale. So I'm just a face with representing them.
No, I think there's a lot more than that. But I just want to acknowledge that, Uber is truly, once in a generation company. It's pretty much single-handedly created a whole category. And even today, there are only a handful of players around the world. They all look like, Uber in many respects, not necessarily at the same level of innovation and or market leadership that Uber has in many geographies. One of the things, you probably alluded to, and I know you've talked about in the past, is this whole idea of, the founder mindset, even within a large company. And I think you in the, for Uber in Indian context, and Dara, in the Uber globally context, are, while you guys came in much later, but, both you and Dara have operated like a founder, and in some ways, leverage or acknowledge what was the best about the company, but also led the transformation of, what was the best for the future of the company. Satya Nadella, when he recently started using this word, phrase called refounder. He said, like, I'm the refounder, because he doesn't not say, with any arrogance, it's with a lot of humility. It's Microsoft was obviously enormously successful before he came in, but today's Microsoft is very different and hence even more successful. So the idea of refounder, I think a lot of companies can embrace and say, why should we have only first-time founders? Two people in a garage started something great, and that did. But after 10 years, more people can come in if they can have the founders, mindset. And looks like you have definitely operated, with that mindset, right, in the company, and encouraged a lot around you.
I won't even come close to some of the names which you described, and I won't even describe whether I have that or not. But I truly like to bring that to the extent I can. I think it's a journey. I fundamentally believe that at the end of the day, many of us have the privilege to be where we are and what we are doing. And it would be a pity if you're not using that with a mindset of complete ownership. In fact, one of the values which Travis, as the founder of Uber, brought in was, I recall still from 2015, which is be an owner, not a renter, right? Which is, to me, similar as a founder's mindset, which is really like every day you have to show up and assume you're the owner of the business, which in my case, I wasn't, but that doesn't stop me from being like one. Which means that when I'm taking I've probably done more than 10,000 Uber trips as a rider, probably more than 300 trips as a driver. Every time I'm doing that, if I see something which can improve, am I just letting it be, or am I using my influence and opportunity to actually make that? Could that minor escalation, I often get escalations directly through friends, family, networks, through strangers. I get calls sometimes in the middle of the night from folks who are facing a problem. Now, while obviously one is to solve that specific issue, which there are great teams who help us do that, but could I use that as a chance to say, hey, what really went wrong there? Can we dig in? So often the question we need to ask is why, what happened, what's the RCA for that? And I think that doesn't take much. So, and hopefully what that does is if it can spark 4 more other people in my team, in the org, to be able to do that, I have done my job. And the good part is I'm actually, as I said, surrounded by a incredibly committed set of colleagues who are all owners in their own way, and we are trying to keep that going.
Yeah, again, I think you have a way of expressing it in very straightforward, but these are very profound lessons for anyone trying to make their mark or an impact in a company and grow. This whole like what happens when you encounter a small problem? Like most people ignore it, but this is reminding me of a lesson I heard a long time ago from the then Mark and Spencer CEO in some retail forum. This is my Myntra days. Someone asked him, what is the most impactful thing you do as a CEO? And he shared that he will visit different Mark and Spencer outlets, and every now and then he will see a box of cereal is thoda teda, not aligned, or something has fallen. So he will stop the tour, he will fix it, make sure everything is aligned, and then walk off. And he's thinking that sends a message to everyone in the company that what really matters. He's thinking more than any gyan I can give to people, that act of actually solving a
incredible,
because there is a core value, the Mark and Spencer store should look like spick and span any time, and that's how you do it, not by having big grand policies. So being having that, I see a problem, I fix it then and there. It gets noticed also. I've seen when youngsters do in the company that their managers notice it, you get more responsibility. So it's quite profound, and we can have a whole class on this. I know we have a shared interest in this. I think earlier you were alluding to ELD, which is a program I was running, unfortunately not. And I think you expressed a lot of interest at that time that you really like to give back and mentor. And
yes,
are you able to do that deliberately in Uber? And a lot of it I'm sure happens by osmosis. You have some programs. Like, what are your method of developing youngsters?
I think my fascination with the theme of unlocking human potential actually goes back to my previous life when I was a management consultant, and I found my sweet spot in capability building at scale. I think the firm where I was working at was doing a fabulous job in driving transformation program. One of the big things we'd find is it's really not the great answer or the blueprint which we'll come up with for the client. It's really about how do you make sure that at scale people embed the new processes, right? If you're transforming a public sector bank network or a large insurance company, how do you make sure that every frontline executive embraces technology or embraces the new operating system as much, and spend almost disproportionate time in doing that? So we kind of came up with a philosophy and the methodology around that, which works on both unlocking your core purpose, unlocking the systems and tools, and unlocking the motivation. And then when you start working on that, you realize this is as true for a CXO as for a frontline sales executive in a bank branch. And that, I think, got me to really think deeply about how do I then inculcate, why do I need a program for that? Can we make it into an ongoing process? So I think that's where my passion and thinking comes from. And now I'm seeing, even as an AI becomes a reality, one of the areas I'm absolutely fascinated about is now imagine the potential of taking this at scale. Now you could be anyone, anywhere in any company. You could literally be an Uber driver in India. Imagine if I can unlock ways to improve your potential in the way which you want it, in the language which you want, understanding your history, and using the same philosophy which I can use to actually coach a CXO. That's where kind of the passion comes from. I still have a longish life and career ahead of me, hopefully, and I will probably be able to give back in a more meaningful way.
It's incredible, I think, and I'm pretty sure, like, among many things, I think this passion for unlocking human potential is probably a big part of, Uber's ride, if I can say that, over the last, 5-6 years, which is just phenomenal. I think, you guys have done a lot for the whole mobility ecosystem of the country. As a result, you have pole position in your category. You continue to bring a lot of innovation. And I think from, every time I meet you, I notice that you are not satisfied. You always have, you're more focused on what more we can do.
Look, it is, and look, it's folks like you who provoke us to think even more bigger. The reality is, it's a platform like Uber or other such networks. What they're able to do is create purpose for example, in our case, 14 lakh active drivers today. Now, suddenly they are able to find a purpose. They are able to find a livelihood of respect. Are we getting it right all the time? No. Can we improve how we show up and how the technology works, how we are able to listen to them? Absolutely. And what's more interesting is that 14 lakh active earners today are probably, say, 4 people to a family, are enabling almost 60 lakh people to actually get food on the table. And for a country like India, that number can become 5 to 10x as shared mobility becomes a reality. There is I can't imagine Bangalore 5 years from now if more private vehicles keep getting added. Shared mobility will be the way where our cities have to grow, and we have to leapfrog historical private vehicle ownership trends over there. So that's both a deep opportunity and a responsibility.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely talk about Bangalore traffic, which is. But before we get sidetracked and crib about that, let's talk more about driver. 14 lakh drivers. It's a huge number. Who are these people? मतलब कौन है ये लोग? कहाँ से आते हैं? पहले क्या करते थे? Are many of them first-time driver? Like, how is that whole ecosystem built?
This is an incredibly heterogeneous base of drivers who are coming across different cities, but in general, they tend to be male. I wish we could have more women drivers. I think that percentage is abysmally low, and we want to change that. Many of them tend to be typically migrants who have come from 60 to 100 kilometers away from an urban city center in search of a livelihood. Many of them have actually experienced some other kind of a job or work, a blue-collar commitment before driving, and were looking to typically become more independent. Because what driving on a ride-hailing platform allows you to do is truly become your own boss, where you can choose to work when you want. Some of them like working in nights, some of them are comfortable working on weekends, some of them like to pick the early morning and evening peaks. Large number of them actually for a month go back to their villages and the harvest season happens so that they can actually support their families during that. So it's a very heterogeneous mix, but mostly this is what I would consider a typical profile. What we're also seeing is increasingly, while the first phase was very much around this profile, for the last 2 to 3 years, as we have diversified our portfolio, for example, to include products like auto, which have had a bunch of incumbents operating. Remember when Uber came in, there was into the market, there was always this, hey, is Uber versus auto. I think fundamental shift which Uber has made is to say, look, there could be incredible synergy here. Uber has this massive demand pool, which can benefit the auto drivers. And then there are these auto drivers who can actually serve a use case for consumers which are complementary to cars or bikes. So as we've done that, this is a very different profile of earners who come and use a platform for few times a day. They will probably sometimes pick a consumer from the street. On other times, they'll use a ride-hailing platform. So again, it's a very, very heterogeneous mix. And what I am absolutely fascinated by is the stories and the human stories behind each one of them, because each of them is very, very different.
And how connected you as a CEO you think are to your drivers? How much do you get to talk to drivers every now and then? What do they tell you when you talk to them?
It's far lesser than what I should be doing, but I'm trying to keep doing more and more. So I think that there are 2 or 3 ways. Right? One is I absolutely talk to drivers when I'm on Uber trip. I use Uber everywhere as a rider.
आज भी यहाँ पे आप
Uber I use different product. That's how the feedback goes to my team. They would have got 3 screenshots by the time the trip ended.
So every time you're leaving office, they're worried. Actually, I can relate to that. Again, I don't do much of it now, but till pandemic, I used to visit nearly all the call center. और call center में मतलब वो reception से कि यहाँ पे वो टेढ़ा है, यहाँ पे water bottle नहीं है, वहाँ पे वो नहीं है, carpet में, and like we'll generate list of 20 things by the time that one center trip is done, and then one more. I think there's a reminder I need to resume
that explains why it's such a successful network. Kudos to that itself. Look, so obviously I take the trip, and look, you have a captive audience when you're on the trip. I can talk to the driver. That actually explains. I like to tell my team that explains my poor rider rating.
You don't say कि आप जानते नहीं मैं कौन हूँ.
No, but I can't hold back if I have a suggestion, right? Like तो वो नहीं बोलता. No, I don't say that. But also what we do is we spend a lot of time listening to drivers in what we call Uber Samaj, where every city at least once a week there is a group of drivers which comes together, which teams are listening, and in a very systematic way what the themes we hear kind of gets captured and kind of shared. And then third is I drive, and that is the most eye-opening experience, to be honest. I drive once every 2 to 3 months, a full 6 to 8 hour shift, which will give me a sense of the experience, the anxiety, the joys of being over there.
That's fascinating. Let's talk about your recent, when the last time you were there, like, how do you start, what kind of car you drive, how do you get your rides, and just take us through that day when Prabh is the Uber driver.
Wow, okay. I think the few things what we do is I try to do it without actually mentioning to the rider who am I. Often I am asked hey, you don't look like an Uber driver, etc.
नहीं,
So
but
that
कैसे चालू कहाँ से होता है? Like आप मतलब you use your own car or
no. So what we do is we basically we will rent a car for the day from one of the fleet partners because it needs to be a commercial vehicle, which is a yellow plate. I insist on getting a car which is not new. So the last car I drove had run 210,000 kilometers.
Oh wow.
It was rickety, but it was as real to what a Uber driver would experience.
And how do you dress that day?
Like jeans and t-shirt as
the cool driver.
The cool Uber driver. Look, it is a tough vocation. I can choose to do it once in 3 months, but imagine you have to do it day in and day out, and it's demanding. But I kind of then drive without any specific configuration so that I can get the full experience which a regular Uber driver
right
with same anxiety
and back
to the airport, and then you're tired and you want in the end of the day you want to probably just get one more trip, but then a trip which comes to take you from Whitefield to JP Nagar. Now, do you accept it? But you have sometimes mistakenly accepted it in the anxiety of do you cancel it? Will I be penalized for cancellation? You go through that. The anxiety, which the 2-3 things which have always hit me. I always underestimated the joy of when a trip comes. Like you're experiencing it sitting in a meeting room in a Zoom. You know the products should work, etc. But experiencing it when you are in a car, driving at 20 kilometers per hour, the same app experience looks and feels different. That's a real test. Second thing is the anxiety is real. You finished a trip, you're waiting, now you're worried. Hey, is something wrong with my phone? Am I standing at the wrong place? Should I call someone to the Uber call center and say, hey, is my app working okay? That anxiety is real when you're waiting for the trip baja nahi baja.
थोड़े demanding customers भी मिलते हैं और
all
kinds. Sometimes maybe you were scared of who were in the car.
There will be interesting stories. The ones which I think you meet all kinds of consumers, but more often than not, it's just the heartwarming stories. The first time I drove, I literally remember every story. So I ended up picking a mother-son who were visiting from Nigeria for medical treatment. This was in Gurgaon, and they used to come for a treatment, and they said, hey, when we used to earlier come before Uber was there, I would take this 4-hour, 8-hour package, and I would have then far lesser money to invest in the medical treatment. But now I just do a point-to-point. I picked up, I recall, a young mother who was picking up her preschool kid from the preschool. And she said, look, thanks to Uber and other ride-hailing platform apps, I am no longer dependent on my husband, and I can actually send my kid to the dream preschool which I wanted to, because I am now able to myself get along. So you hear those stories. You also get all kinds of other situations where riders who will insist for you to be picked up from that narrow lane, knowing very well that coming out is going to be hard. Riders who, by the way, request using multiple apps. Uber and X and Y, and then 2 cars will reach there and they will cancel the one which came 1 minute later. And then you realize, damn, I used fuel, I used time and energy to get there. So you see the colors, the vibrancy, the culture of a city come alive when you drive. I would actually invite you to drive. I think maybe next time we should do a conversation with you behind the wheel.
100% done. When can we do this? This is actually reminding me, I have done some deliveries in my Myntra and Flipkart days. And one of the, I should have that picture somewhere. It's like during this festival season, things are pretty crazy. So I went on a bike with the Flipkart driver. I was riding, pillion, and we went to, the customer's house to deliver something, and it was cash on delivery order, and that person doesn't have cash. So he said, "कि वो ATM चलते हैं, वही पास में ही है." And then we end up 3 of us on the bike, drove to ATM. Guy took the money out, you did the delivery. But you learn so much, you get so much insight about just so I'm 100%. I think I missed doing that. So yeah,
whenever you're for it. If one of the themes which I feel very strongly about, my teams have heard me, is something what I call the yellow plate divide. All of us in India recognize the diversity and the beauty of the diversity in the country. But we also understand diversity on religion, race, language. But I'm also realizing there is a divide around what I call the yellow plate divide. That if you are someone who is driving a yellow plate car, which is a commercial driver, the way the world treats you is sometimes very different when you may be driving a private car, when everything else being the same. I got, many of us stay in gated complexes. One of the trips I got was a pickup from the gated complex where I stay, where I normally, if I would go in the back seat of my car or back seat of an Uber, the guard will literally just give a little bit of a high salute or just a signal, very, very positive, a smile. And here's I got a tray, I was sitting in the front seat, he didn't recognize me. And the way he talked to me was very, very different. It reminded me of what a driver faces every day. Imagine a driver is just being stopped at the gate, has gone through this partial rough conversation. Now, how would he, when he reaches to pick you up, the consumer expects him to be smiling and happy and supportive. But he's done that now 15 times a day. And maybe the local cop may have pulled him over and challan. I went to a challan for
speeding.
No, not for speeding, but it wasn't even a challan. It was actually someone stopped me and said, hey, there is rule number XYZ of Motor Vehicles Act where there is a yellow sticker which is supposed to be on a commercial car, and that's torn off. And then you realize that those are things which add up to your experience through the day.
I think you're also making me introspective, because mostly when you look at Uber or ride-sharing driver, we are either neutral or unhappy. Like, I don't remember being even a little bit grateful or acknowledging the humanness of the person who's that's probably all of us can think a bit more about this yellow divide. Which is,
I think that's one thing we could do. I think, look, all trips won't be perfect. There will be, and we have to keep getting better. But sometimes small gestures around the thank you, not banging the door. Imagine that's your car. You
आजकल लोग chat GPT को thank you बोलते हैं सारे time.
Exactly.
Please or
it doesn't
thank you.
change the answer. That thank you doesn't help that. Exactly. That's a great point.
But driver को बोल सकते हैं.
Driver को, simple thing, don't bang the door. It's his car. Right. He's taken his life savings. However you felt during the trip, you just close the door politely.
Yeah. And this, I think, you drive often. I think last couple of weeks ago I was reading the story that an Uber employee gets in the car and the her manager was driving the car. I don't know. So I don't know if you heard that story or not.
I read about that.
Is this a culture in the company? And I know, Dara has, in fact, last time when he was in India, he was also talking about, he often drives in US. I think he drove in India as well, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I don't. His license won't.
You didn't allow him to.
No, he can't. Like, he won't clear our safety checks because his license won't be recognized.
Fair enough. Okay.
But I think it's a culture. I think the huge credit also goes to Dara, and he joined us 2017. There was a complete cultural reset. I think things around making safety a priority, push around being closer to consumers. So not just him, his entire exec leadership team drives or delivers, depending on which geography they are in. Many folks on my teams do that, and now I think it's almost become a program. One of the pushes I actually have made to my teams, and they have to figure out how to do it, is how do we invite external ecosystem to come and drive? Folks like you, maybe there are 100 other people, and say drive for a day, and then give us feedback on what we can do better. You always understand the consumer side, but let's come and do that.
No, absolutely. I think that's I think it's a very powerful leadership lesson. I think for a lot of people, especially in the consumer business, how do you put yourself, if your frontline staff, whether it's a store, in our case, let's say fitness trainer, or a frontline staff in a retail store, how do you see things from that person's perspective? Otherwise, that person is just cog in the wheel. It's just a number in the 14 lakh number, but the humanness and the everyday challenges and what's at stake for that person gets missed out. And as a management team, we may be making many decisions where that stakeholder is completely absent for the conversation. I think, just let's talk a bit about also the massive cultural transformation that Dara has brought about. I think, Uber by all accounts is doing extremely well, highly profitable, pretty significant market cap, almost no controversies, very minor ones. There was time when Uber was known for, figuring out a way to be in headlines all the time. A lot of innovation, but a lot of wrong reason as well. It's not easy to transform a company, so significantly, and you must have observed this, up close and participate in this transformation. What does it take,
I've been absolutely fortunate to be part of that and see that from both frontline and sidelines. I think the few themes which as I reflect, I think one is there is this continuous intent to be dissatisfied with status quo. And that's not, I'm sure that's not just for Dara, but all other leaders who I respect, and including what I've seen you do, is to say, look, one of the things Dara did was, hey, first 2017 is very clear what we need to do. We need to kind of come out from the previous generation of the culture which we had built. Post-pandemic, we rebuilt the business. He kind of helped lead from the front. He's already he caught the long-term macro trends much in advance, literally till very recently, till as late as early this year, he had called out, look, how artificial intelligence is going to change the world, how autonomous. We see it as both as a real opportunity for Uber, being able to then say, look, I am not satisfied with what the status quo is. Let's push ourselves. In less than a year today, Uber has 15 different autonomous partners globally, and we are actually setting the tone on what the future of autonomous ride-hailing should be. The same kind of played out also in internal culture around our practices around diversity and inclusion, setting the tone to make sure that we truly celebrate diversity of thought, because that improves the answer. Remember, our consumers are diverse, drivers are diverse, riders are very diverse. How can the decision making always be done by a 40-year-old male who's come from a privileged background and is taking decision on what matters? You need diversity of thought. I think he's actually led that and role model. Is it like something which is dramatically different from what we've heard other leaders? No, but he's actually put that in practice.
Yeah, I think some level, and pretty much all of us know what the right thing is, but translating that into not only decision action, but into culture and a system.
Yes.
So it becomes, self-propagating, that's what,
Absolutely. I think it comes down to that. I love that word you use, Mukesh, systems, right? I think you and I have debated that in the past. Like at some point, an organization reaches a size and scale where the system thinking becomes far more important. Right. How do you kind of adjust at the big building blocks in a way and keep adapting it? And right, that agility which you're bringing, I think that's exactly that. And as Cult went from, I think last time when we met, you were speaking about the 5,000 equivalent centers and the feedback process, and how now you're putting artificial intelligence around it to be able to do that. And that to me is a great example of system thinking, where what worked earlier is may not work, but still you want to keep the core essence of listening going.
No, one of the conversations I end up having with a lot of folks in the team that I work with, there's going to be a problem, someone will offer a solution. I'm saying, are you solving it for now, or let's say long after you are gone, will this problem be forever solved? Because one is 1000x better than the other one. So which one, and there is usually, it doesn't come naturally. So that into your second order thinking, third order thinking, right? That's when you think through that, and if you can just solve it that well through systems and process and culture, then it doesn't matter whether you are there or not there, right? Your stamp is imprinted on the company.
And look, and the other thing you're learning, beyond systems, is also about, to the founder's mentality. There will be systems thinking, but then there's also can coexist a fix-it culture, which is, hey, sometimes systems also mean that you have to think big and scale, but there will tons of tiny things, right? Which is where connecting back to the driving experience, and Dara drives or our CPO drives or I drive, we're suddenly finding these issues. Now you can't wait for the whole system to be just resolved. What we always run is this fix-it stream, which means you're not resourcing too many people for it, but you will somehow find that extra 10% capacity to get that outrage when you see something is not working. You still need space for that to be solved for very, very quickly.
Right. This fix-it thing, all of us will want a lot in our companies. I remember going back to Myntra days, at some point, I think everyone, learns whole Toyota way of doing things from 80s and 90s, and you come across this whole end-on code. And I was talking to team there कि यहाँ पे कैसे करें, कि Myntra क्या हो सकता है कि can everyone can stop thinking, pay attention to this. Like we don't in this corporate cultures, we don't have an equivalent of that. Ki there is a problem, I want to stop everything, pay attention to this, right? It's just probably some food for thought. I want to go back to what you were saying about autonomous vehicles. So that whole thing is really changing, and I don't know whether there's enough visibility in India about that or not. But I was in San Francisco, a few months ago, and I did my first Waymo ride. And for people who are not familiar with Waymo, it's a completely autonomous, it's a Google's project, but you can through an app book, and Waymo comes and you get in. There is no driver, the driver's seat is empty. There's a ghost there, and the car. And San Francisco is not an easy place to drive. A lot of uphills, downhills, and tight turns and so on. and it's been doing incredible job for a while now. In fact, recently I saw the stats in San Francisco City. Now there are more autonomous drives per day than the ride-sharing drives per day, which is at reasonable scale, which demonstrate that technology is already here. They say the future is already here. It's not evenly distributed. So it's there in San Francisco, and I think I'd love to hear your perspective on how Uber is thinking about it. Because if I just extrapolate from there, if it can work in one city at scale, it can work. I don't know about India. We'll come to that because we have infrastructure challenges. But in general, looks like we are entering the era of autonomous vehicles.
I think that, look, the future is here. I won't comment on specific stats for San Francisco, but fundamentally at Uber we are building towards a hybrid network where human drivers and autonomous vehicles can and should coexist. And the reason for that is purely about the variability in demand and supply. If you are an autonomous only network, the reality is then you'll have to build so much extra capacity because there will be massive demand peaks. But and these are very expensive assets, etc. Versus having a hybrid network, what allows you to do is build a base level capacity on autonomous vehicles in a city, and then there are human drivers which are able to then supplement that during peaks. At the same time, there will be consumers who would sometimes want an autonomous but are not willing to wait longer, and they would rather get a human driver which is available faster. So to do that, what we are actually doing is we're taking a partnership route. We're partnering with asset owners like Waymo who are developing the technology, but the magic will be, can a technology like that can be availed on the Uber app. So for example, in Austin, Waymo has launched through the Uber app. So there is no separate Waymo app live, unlike San Francisco. And we are seeing some very interesting traction, faster deployment, faster utilization, and you're able to see the ride-hailing pie overall actually expand. And that's the magic, because then suddenly you are able to fulfill a lot more demand. Then the need for private vehicle coming out of the garage goes down, and hopefully the need for a second or a third private vehicle goes down. I think with developments in AI, this will only accelerate from here on.
And what is the future of autonomous vehicles in India? Have you seen even any pilots, experiments that people try to see, what will it take to, drive in any of the Indian cities?
Look, I feel it's still early. I think we have heard of a few Indian startups who are experimenting. I think early days, but we continue to watch the space. I think we are probably still few years away from commercial autonomous vehicles.
Only a few years in India?
Few is judgment based. Those who know me know that I avoid crystal ball gazing. I think the pace at which technology is adapting, pace at which Indian entrepreneurs are innovating for India, things can move. Right now, from Uber's lens, I can say that we are very much focused on the human network of earners. We're still significantly underpenetrated. I want to be able to grow our earner base to 2 to 3x of what it is today. And still we will be short of vehicles and drivers. That's the potential of the India market.
Let's just zoom out, and in Indian context, let's talk about, where we are in terms of mobility. Again, you can correct my stat, but somewhere, as I was preparing for this, at least in big cities, only about a percentage of rides every day are on ride-sharing platforms. Which is 99% of the rides are either people are driving themselves or maybe public transport. But first of all, it's fair to say that, when a Uber driver is ferrying, 20, 30, customers throughout the day, there's probably less congestion on the road compared to each of us, driving our own vehicle going from one place. Is that ride sharing is part of the solution for, heavily congested roads that we have in our cities?
I think that is the core thesis which we believe in and which has been playing out. Fundamentally, if you are able, the ride-hailing vehicle is probably doing 12 to 15 trips a day. For that particular socioeconomic segment, they would have otherwise likely taken out a private vehicle to go from point A to point B. So those many lesser cars come out of the driveway. If you are able to serve that, obviously to do that, we need to make sure that the reliability and experience actually match to what consumers would expect. Second horizon, we should imagine we are able to input 2 or 3 people in the same vehicle who are going from point A to point B, and technology allows us to do that matching. I am going from here to Whitefield.
Do you have that product already in there?
We have had that product pre-pandemic. During pandemic, for obvious reasons, we at that point scaled it down, and we will look to bring it back in due course. Third, imagine you can then take the same technology, and what if you are able to then put even larger number of people in a larger vehicle together, which will begin to look like, say, what historically a public transport bus could have looked done like. But this is no longer constrained to have a fixed route only, which is hard-coded for multiple months. Imagine routes which can change every week because you're continuously optimizing. And then suddenly you can make an economic case for this. Delhi today, we have a vibrant Uber shuttle network, which is these buses which you can book through the app. On an average, each bus is coming every 3.5 minutes.
But
and the comfort
where does
of
the bus come? If I book a bus, where will it come?
No, there are predefined spots which have been mapped out where the buses will stop with very clear markings, etc.
Okay, you can look for a spot closest to you, just walk to
whatever 100 meters from Leela Hotel or X place from Rameshwaram Cafe, and you will be able to do that. And it's already seeing incredible utilization and adoption. So now you have suddenly taken a simple technology solution from point A to point B, put more people in the same asset. Now you've taken it into a bigger asset, and then suddenly you can imagine the value which ride-hailing is bringing. On top of it, ride-hailing is the most efficient way to feed a public transport ecosystem. The best answer any day for a city is a good public transport network. The metro system, which is in now growing in multiple cities.
And I think in Delhi you can also book metro.
Yes,
Uber app, right?
in Delhi, we can actually now, we have introduced metro ticketing, so that when we realize that there is a large number of users who are booking an Uber Moto or Uber Auto to go to the metro station or out of the metro station. But for then booking the metro ticket, they have to either take out their pass or take another app. So we said, why don't we just allow that to also happen? Imagine then this is a feeder system being created into the most efficient way of how a city should commute. I think that's why I'm so convinced that shared mobility is the path forward for the high congestion reality in the market. And we have to be able to obviously rise to the occasion as a platform to provide the service standards and reliability, which will give you the confidence to not buy your second car or a second two-wheeler, or hopefully at some point even the first car. We're seeing that many of the early jobbers joining the network are choosing not to buy their first asset, or at least delaying the purchase of that.
But how does the infrastructure for this come about? These buses, who needs to invest? Because I mean, the individual drivers will not be able to invest. These are much more expensive assets. So how does how do the platform enable? What roles do government need to play, or other entrepreneurs? If there is enough return on capital, from this investment? Because I imagine for this to be reality, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of buses need to be on in big city.
I think a big transformations like this, Mukesh, I fundamentally believe first happen slowly and then happen in an accelerated manner, and always happen when it is seen as a team sport. It is a complete team sport. Government has a role which is not to run these buses. The government has a role to create a regulatory ecosystem which allows innovation like this to thrive. Right? A Bangalore like city is absolutely the prime example, where imagine being able to run hundreds of these buses between Hebbal and ORR day in and day out, and then being able to complement the metro system as it comes and optimizing the network as it plays out. The asset in this case will typically be purchased by an entrepreneur who is already in the ecosystem, or fresh entrepreneurs. The role of platforms like us will be to give them the revenue assurance so that they can make those forward-looking investments.
I'm sure there's probably not a single day goes by when AI shows up in some way, shape, in your internal dialogues in management team, Uber in India and globally. So what is your current perspective on, how you're preparing yourself, where you're seeing adoption, acceleration because of, what's happening in the AI?
I think AI, before I talk about my professional hat, I think AI in my personal environment, I think it feels like a little of a kid in a candy shop situation, where there is just so much to try, so much to experience, and things are evolving. I realized that my daughter's using more AI tools than maybe even I am right now. So
have you tried to upload their tennis serve and get feedback from AI?
She is doing that, and she wants me to interpret it and find smart ways to. And I worry about becoming redundant. Like I still have some coaching tips I can hopefully give to her, but kind of within the organization and just with a professional hat, I think AI is absolutely now front and center of all dialogues for every head of the business, every CEO across the country, globally. In fact, I think we are embracing AI. We truly believe that from AI being an enabler, we will become an AI first organization. I think that, and the dialogue is moving from if I divide it into the why, what, and how. I think the why is now very clear, right? Why one needs to embrace. Within that, within the why, the dialogue has shifted from, hey, AI will help me shave off X billion dollars from my cost structure, to now, how do I improve productivity of the people we have? Can engineers code more? Can we ship faster? Can ops teams do more without increasing headcount? To the third frontier, which is going to, I think, still early days, but how do we take AI to improve our competitive edge in the market? I think, as we were talking earlier, hey, how do I get consumer experiences which are n equal to 1? I have 14 lakh drivers here. That number is 8 million globally. How does the Uber experience for each of them look and feel different? Some people like to do certain kinds of trips. They behave differently. It's a very heterogeneous pool, as we spoke about. How does it show up? Each consumer experiences Uber differently. How should your app experience just learn so quickly about you and show up differently? Those will be themes which will continue to evolve. I think the why is getting less of a debate. The what is beginning to now get firmer. The how is still an open dialogue. Like how do you overcome the change management around that? How do you get a workforce which ranges from a 20-year-old to someone who's at the end of their professional career, and yet all of them can benefit from AI adoption? I think that's the challenge which I think keeps many of us awake. And landing that right is going to be, I think, pretty pivotal. For a market like India particularly, I think AI can be an incredible boon to reduce the disparity in skill sets, reduce the disparity on where we as an emerging market are, say, looking to catch up with the developed world. At the same time, it will come with reasonably credible threats where certain historical skills and jobs could get completely changed, but others will show up in their place.
Yeah, I think it's probably very easy to now agree on that. First of all, AI is here, it's real, and it's probably going to transform organizations, beyond recognition. I don't know how long, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, but seems like we are pretty much in that zone. So Prabh, I want to just, thank you for taking time for this podcast, but more importantly, I think you are an incredible leader. I think your contribution to, the whole mobility ecosystem in India, Uber, it's profound. I think you could have easily been a college professor as well, giving leadership coaching a lesson, which will be very, very effective. I think you're very thoughtful, very grounded, humble leader. And I think there's so much to learn from you. I'm, glad you were able to share some of those lessons, but I think there is a whole book or a series or a course, hiding somewhere inside you. At some point, you should find time to bring it out, maybe in a theater form.
You are being very, very kind, but I think it's just been a privilege, and I think both what you're doing with this podcast, I think bringing in this incredible set of thinkers, diverse set of thinkers, passionate believers in certain topics together, I think is, I'm a huge fan. And I think also what you are building now, particularly in the frontiers of AI, I think the next 15, 20 years together, I can see so much happening in this ecosystem. So glad we are talking, and maybe some of the predictions we are making today could become pretty real very, very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Thanks, Prabh. Look forward to, and also look forward to my Uber drive in the front seat here.
There you go. Absolutely.
Thank you. At SparX, we aim to bring to you stories of exponential impact. We share in-depth analysis of what goes behind success stories. If you find our conversations interesting, you can join us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to SparX on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or any other audio platform of your choice. If you have any suggestions on who we should invite or what topics we need to cover, just let us know in the comments. We are always listening, looking for ways to improve, and keep getting better as we go along.